Hey everyone. Well, it's no big secret that the next few years are going to be challenging for the Social Security system. According to the Social Security Trustees report, the most recent one, the trust fund is going to be empty by 2035. And if you look at the report from the Congressional Budget Office, that date's going to be 2 years earlier in 2033. But either way, I think it's safe to say that we're getting too close for comfort and something needs to be done. If nothing is done and everything stays the way it is, benefits will be cut at that point between 20 to 25%. There's simply no provision in current law that allows any transfers from the general treasury to prevent that cut. Now, with that said, I do not expect an across-the-board benefit cuts to those who are currently receiving benefits or eligible to receive benefits. I do fully believe that reform will happen and those who are receiving benefits will not see any reductions. I also think that those who are within a few years of collecting benefits will likely not see any material change to their payment amounts. Legislators have a long history of making changes to the Social Security system that phase in over a very long period of time. This means that reform proposals will likely impact those who are still more than 5 or 10 years away from eligibility age. If this is you, I would recommend considering applying a reduction factor to your Social Security payments and your retirement income estimates. But for everyone who is older than, say, roughly 55 right now, I don't think you'll see any big changes. I could be wrong, but that's my thought right now. Ultimately, I do think that within the next few years, we're going to see massive changes to the program, and when they're finished, it may not even resemble the program that President Roosevelt signed into law back in 1935. Reform is coming, and I try to keep up with most of these major proposals. So the other day, I ran across this piece from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, or CRFB. If you're not familiar with them and you'd like to get into the details, you should give their site a look. They're a nonprofit that does a great job of giving nonpartisan, objective analysis on any policy issues that have a significant fiscal impact. And the other day, I read their report, the 10 Options to Secure Social Security, which is a very interesting piece. And in this, they list the 10 most likely options to prevent a Social Security cut. And in each of these options, they show how much of the long-term shortfall would be cured by taking that specific action. So today, I want to go over each of these options and then share a few thoughts as well. Just to be clear, fixing the 75-year shortfall does not make the problem go away that we're facing in 2035 or 33, depending on which report you believe. But if the long-term outlook is solid, the short-term funding issues are much easier to fix. For that reason, measuring the impact of any proposals to the long-term funding is much more accurate and relevant. And just a side note, some people have wondered how they came up with 75 years as the measuring period for the long-term outlook. Well, before 1965, they simply projected the funding of the trust fund all the way out into perpetuity, and then ultimately decided that wasn't too accurate. So they chose a 75-year period because that should cover the entire future lifespan of anyone who is currently working. Now, if you want to read this report for yourself, I'll put a link to it in the description. So let's jump in. First up, we have increasing the payroll tax by 1%. Currently, the Social Security portion of the payroll tax is 12.4% on all wages up to a limit that changes every year. If this percentage was changed to 13.4%, just 1% difference, it would fix 28% of the long-term shortfall. Now, needless to say, a 28% fix isn't enough. If they tried to fix it with a payroll tax increase alone, it would take an increase of around 3.5%. Now, half of that would be paid by employers and half of that would be paid by employees. So if this was adopted, everyone would see an immediate tax increase or pay reduction of about 1.75%. But fixing it for the long term would be just that simple. It would be done. But what kills this proposal is that the tax would have to be increased on everyone's wages. And some politicians are unwilling to raise taxes on lower and middle income workers. They certainly don't mind raising taxes to increase revenue, but they want those additional taxes to come only from those with higher incomes. And so, one of the easiest fixes to the program is ignored in favor of, unfortunately, much more complex proposals. The next two proposals relate to the maximum wage cap. So first, let's make sure you understand what that is and how it works. Currently, you only have to pay the Social Security portion of the FICA tax up to a certain amount of your earnings. Any earnings over that amount aren't subject to the 12.4% tax. For example, the maximum wage base for 2022 is $147,000. So if you make $200,000 in wages, you only pay taxes on the first $147,000 and not on the rest of that $53,000. It's not subject to the FICA tax. Now, according to a lot of the politicians who are looking for ways to raise revenue and expand Social Security, this is grossly unfair. They want to increase the revenue from payroll taxes. So this brings us directly to the second proposal, which is to increase the maximum taxable wages to the point where it covers 90% of all earnings. This would fix 22% of the long-term shortfall. So if you look at all wages that were paid to everyone in the United States and put them in one bucket, currently about 83% of those wages fall under the cap and are thus subject to payroll taxes. This proposal wants to increase the maximum cap to the point where 90% of all wages would be subject to the payroll tax. This would mean that the wage base would need to increase from its current level of $147,000 to about $350,000. This 90% ratio is considered to be in line with the intent of the 1977 amendments, where the wage cap was increased and then indexed to annual changes in wages. Up until then, only congressional action increased the maximum cap. But from 1977 on, the wage base increased when wages increased. And that's how the system works today as well, which is why you typically see an annual increase in the amount of wages subject to FICA taxes. Now, indexing to wages was meant to be a permanent fix to the system, so lawmakers wouldn't need to tinker with the rates on an ongoing basis. At that time, they increased the wage base so that 90% of all earnings would be subject to Social Security taxes. But since then, the percentage of earnings covered by that tax has slipped down to 83%. And that's because those that make an income above that level have seen their earnings growing faster than those who earn less than the maximum taxable cap. And this, according to the crowd who wants to raise the taxable wage base, is a problem, and it violates the spirit of the 1977 amendments. They say we need to increase the taxable wage cap back to a point where it would cover 90% of all earnings paid. But those who say we need to leave that maximum cap alone point out that since 1937, the birth of Social Security, the historical average percentage of earnings subject to those taxes has been 83%, which, again, is just about exactly where we are today. The third proposal is to simply eliminate the maximum taxable wage base. Now, this would fix 68% of the long-term shortfall, but there is a catch. What do you do with the additional taxes collected? Do you credit that towards a future benefit? If so, that number that will be fixed isn't nearly 68%. It's much lower. If you don't credit the additional taxes towards a future benefit, the system would no longer be paying benefits based on the amount of taxes paid in. This is one of the central pillars of the system, and not having that would violate the very nature that Social Security was founded on. The fourth option would be to subject cafeteria plans to payroll taxes. This would fix 10% of the long-term shortfall. Currently, some companies offer their employees the option to participate in a cafeteria plan, which is often called a flexible benefit plan. It allows employees to choose from a menu of optional plans like dental insurance, vision care, group term life insurance, child care, and maybe even disability insurance. The money that goes into these plans is not only shielded from federal and state taxes, but it's also exempt from payroll taxes. So they want to change that. The fifth option is to cover newly hired state and local government employees. This would close 3% of the long-term funding gap. Now, although this wouldn't have a big impact on the long-term funding of the trust fund, it would get very interesting for a number of reasons. Currently, there are about 15 states where teachers, firefighters, and other public servants are not covered by Social Security. Instead, they participate in their own pension plan as a substitute. This option would effectively require any new hires in any of these states to start paying into Social Security. This would be fantastic for a number of reasons, but I'm going to tell you, it would play havoc with the rules around the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. And if you want to know more about those, be sure to check out my videos where I go into more detail. The sixth option is to grow initial benefits with prices instead of wages. This would fix 97% of the long-term funding. Now, this one is really interesting, and it gets into the weeds a little bit on how benefits are calculated. The summarized version, though, is that there are two methods used by the administration to account for the impact of inflation to benefits. They use wage inflation, as measured by the average wage index, and price inflation, as measured by the CPI-W. The dividing line that determines which of these measurements are used is the benchmark or eligibility year. The eligibility year is simply the year that someone dies, becomes disabled, or turns 62. So before the year of eligibility, benefits are increased based on wage inflation. After the year of eligibility, benefits are increased based on price inflation. And because wage inflation is typically higher than price inflation, this means that if they switch to only using price inflation, future benefits would be lower, and this would reduce the payout of the trust fund. The seventh option is to reduce initial benefits for high earners. This would fix 34% of the shortfall. The way this would be accomplished is by changing the formula. Currently, your earnings are all indexed for inflation, and they take out the highest 35. Then they divide that to get an average monthly amount of the earnings, and they apply it to the formula in place the year you turn 62. This is the formula for 2022. The change to this would be to increase the 90% to a higher number and decrease the next two bands to some number below where they are now. The result would be a higher benefit for lower income people and a lower benefit for higher income earners. And the eighth option is to increase the number of years considered for average lifetime earnings from 35 to 40. This would fix 13% of the shortfall. As you probably know, 35 years are used in the calculation for retirement benefits, whether you have 35 years or not. If you only have 25 years, your calculation would be 25 years of earnings and 10 years of zeros. Making this change to 40 years of earnings would mean that more low or even zero earnings years would be considered and therefore reduce benefits. The ninth option would be to switch to the chain CPI as the measurement method used for the annual cost of living increases. Now, this is one I haven't talked about much because it hasn't gotten a lot of traction, but it is one that is still considered occasionally. This would fix 18% of the shortfall. Now, if you're not familiar with the chain CPI, it accounts for the effects of substitution in the calculation, and it typically leads to lower annual increases than other inflation methods. For example, if the price of beef goes up, the chain CPI will assume that more people will start buying chicken. Having a lower annual increase would mean that future benefits and the corresponding payments from the system would be lower. And the 10th option would be to raise retirement age to 69 and then index it for life expectancy. This would cure 36% of the shortfall. Now, at first glance, the argument for increasing the full retirement age makes perfect sense. It hasn't been adjusted since the 1983 amendments, and the system really needs to adjust for increasing life expectancies. In 1940, life expectancy for a 65-year-old man was 76 years, and for a woman, it was 78 years. Since that time, life expectancy has risen to 83 years for men and 85 years for women. So with individuals living longer, Social Security has to make more payments to each person than in the past. This means that the program's promise to provide retired workers with a certain monthly benefit for the rest of their lives is significantly more expensive today than the same commitment made to recipients in 1940. So based on that information alone, it seems as if raising the full retirement age is a sound, reasonable idea. But as with every other proposal, there may be a few unintended consequences. For example, if the full retirement age is increased, the benefit amount for those who file early would be cut. This is simply because there would be more months between when you file for benefits and your full retirement age. If an individual wants to file as early as possible at 62 and their full retirement age is 67, for example, there are 60 months between when they filed and when they'd reach full retirement age. But increasing the full retirement age by just 1 year to 68 means that there would be 72 months between when you filed and when you reach full retirement age. You push the full retirement age out to 70, and there's now 96 months. This increase in months between earliest eligibility and full retirement age matter even if there are just 12 additional months. Monthly reductions are calculated on a monthly basis. So the more months between the earliest date you can file and the date you reach full retirement age, the more your benefit gets reduced. For example, if your full retirement age is 67 and you file at 62, you receive 70% of your full retirement age benefit amount. If the full retirement age is raised to 68, you'd only receive about 65% of your full retirement age amount at 62. Now, if the full retirement age is raised to 70, then individuals filing at 62 would only receive 55% of their full retirement age benefit. So one of the big questions here is whether the filing behaviors would change if the full retirement age was increased. Currently, about 33% of all retirees file at 62, the earliest age possible. If the increased penalties didn't change this behavior and people continue to file at the earliest age possible, we'd see more seniors with household incomes under the poverty line and possibly a further drain on other government programs to help meet their needs. Ultimately, fixing the system may cause pain for someone, but the truth is, it's not a hard fix. There is a solution that would not impact current retirees, would not rely on tax increases, and would not cut benefits to lower income retirees. To me, this seems to be the perfect solution, and it flabbergasts me that it's not talked about more often. So coming up next, be sure to watch this video where I lay out in an easy to understand format how this change would work. I'll see you there.